Good evening, everybody. This is Cinnamon Noir.
And this is the Ramen Shaman.
Welcome back to Epistory Typing Chronicles.
She had grounded the storm, tamed the lightning.
Rode the Lightning. Metallica, 1988. You remember that riff? Jesus.
Yeah?
I don't actually remember much about Metallica. Oh, sorry. I mean, I remember the famous songs, but I don't remember that album much.
I like a lot of their 80s stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Before the Sellout album.
Well, I just don't really like anything after the Black Album, honestly.
Mm-hmm. It's understandable. Anyway, I don't know why I left Creation City, because the next area we have to go to, the third optional dungeon, is right next to it. Closer, I think, than any of the others in the game. So close, in fact, that I came here the first time I played this before I actually got to Creation City and thought that it was the third major dungeon.
May I ask what happened there?
I ran into a bunch of bugs and got punked.
I guess. I just...
Nothing special.
You didn't, run away.
May I ask why you were an idiot? No, you can't, because I don't know. It's odd. Maybe I forgot there were a bunch of them there. Or maybe I was naively trusting in the power of Spark to save me. Because I don't know if you remember from last episodes, but Spark is obscenely overpowered.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I was gonna say, you've seen my play of games like Dark Souls. You know
she knew
the kind of dumbass mistakes I make.
Yes, I have. Not much lately,
horrors, though.
Too.
For people in real life, Greg's computer's been having trouble for some time, so...
Mm-hmm.
Oh well, it happens. We just have to watch more of the weird games that I play.
Clearly.
I need to get something new. I haven't bought a game in quite a while.
I was thinking of getting, the game Death's Gambit.
Yeah, I've heard about that. Oh, wait, sorry. I'm being stupid. Dead Cells is the one I've been thinking of. A lot of games with dead in the title these days.
Death's Gambit is much closer to Dark Souls, but it's...
I saw it. It looked a lot like Salt and Sanctuary.
Yeah. Apparently, it's not as good as Salt and Sanctuary.
Oh, jeez.
So...
That doesn't sound good to me. I didn't even think much of Salt and Sanctuary.
Yeah, no, I did like Salt and Sanctuary, but...
The mine had been abandoned for some time. No fires burned in the furnaces.
I don't know. I've heard
chatter
things like...
from the rocky walls.
I've heard the
still.
The stamina isn't... The stamina meter isn't very well balanced.
And these aren't coming just from zero punctuation.
Cautiously through the gloom.
Oh no.
Okay.
Actually, they're coming from Jim Sterling.
Like revealing.
Oh, of course.
Somewhat, but
Anyway, this area is kind of interesting. Here is where light really starts to come into play as a mechanic. Because, and I don't think we've seen this before, when an object that is not a crystal is in the darkness, you can't see it, which means you can't see the words. And therefore, it's a limitation. That's not a big deal right now, because we're just, getting points. But obviously, when you're in the middle of combat, it is very crucial to be able to see and spell.
Yeah, I can imagine.
That's going to come into play in here at some point. I'm a little surprised there was none of that in the main dungeon. It does seem that in general in Epistory, that the way it's set up is that you get a new power in the main dungeons, and the optional dungeons focus around some mechanic that is not power-related. So in the ice, dungeon, we had all that slipping around on ice and the physical stuff, which was not in the Drowning Halls, for the most part.
Yeah.
I guess now that I think about it, there was a little bit of it. So, I mean, I guess the puzzles aren't that amazing in the optional levels, but they are a little bit different.
Flowstone.
Say that again?
No, it's not.
Yeah, did it say flowstone or glowstone?
Flowstone.
These crystals held a strange
I don't know if
resonance.
that's a word.
I've only...
there are several words in this game, I'm not sure if they're words.
I've only seen it in Magic the Gathering.
Oh, well, it could be a reference then.
She found
Maybe?
There are a few words in this that are explicitly fantasy-oriented.
For she had been here.
So, fun fact, when I first played through this game, I actually came here before I went to the second optional dungeon. So that was the first time I'd ever seen those glowing squares. And I thought they were just in here.
Interesting.
She was not.
This isn't really a
shadows.
puzzle in this one. I mean, you can't fall off the edge or anything. So I just say it's an element to the background.
From the dark.
In the earlier ones, you actually had to move around. And if you missed one, it could reset.
It is useful.
But I think it'd be very difficult to get this wrong.
It is useful for leading you along though through the dark.
The aid of machines.
Yeah, right. That's why it's there. But I guess it's more of what I would call a set piece than a puzzle. If you know what I mean. I mean, obviously, all puzzles are also set pieces, but not all set pieces are puzzles.
True.
That's logic. So this is a big crystal.
The crystal's glow made
There's 3 of them in this dungeon, and they basically constitute the goal.
So what's going on with our character right now?
You mean in real life? At first, I did not remember what this one is about, but I do remember it now. Let me see. I'm trying to see how much of it I should give away. Like, for instance, we already had an image there. I don't know how much you picked up on it in that short little glimpse. I didn't want to show a lot of it. But it looked like a room, didn't it? Like a room full of boxes.
The room grew slowly.
So, the way that I interpret this game, and obviously I could be wrong, but I think it's what they're going for, is that each of the things that it shows... Or sorry, I should say, each of the things that are shown in the optional dungeon is an event in this woman's life that happened while the big thing was happening in the main dungeon. So, like the one that's about college life, the optional dungeon is about her mom dying. That makes me think that her mom died while she was in college. The two things seem to sort of go together, right? The burning hollow at the beginning, that was when she was a kid, and in the forest, I think it showed her rescuing the fox. So that happened when she was a kid.
Yeah.
So the third mandatory dungeon, I think you remember, was her moving to the big city, moving out her own for the first time.
Even the lifeless rock of the mine.
So this is something that happened while she lived on her own.
Couldn't stop the corruption planting its rancid
really...
roots.
So this is...
Though all
That thing
was
really could
not
have blindsided
lost
you.
Yet.
Yeah, you mean like this one did?
Yeah.
I got really lucky on this one, I don't know how. This is the first point, by the way, where the light mechanic comes into play in combat. These things can gang up on you in such a way that you can't see them. And in fact, you may have noticed, the things here are not showing up until they get very close to me. I will say, this is the first point in the game that I ran into a serious glitch. I think there have been a few minor glitches up to this point, but nothing that really got in the way.
Yeah?
Here, I think because of the lighting mechanic, there's a few places where the scenery's lit up, but the game doesn't think it is. So basically, you won't be able to see the words on an insect until it comes up right up next to you.
I was wondering if that was intentional. It's probably
kind of not. Well, I think they intended for it to be invisible until it got into the light. The problem is that I think the mechanic of turning on the visibility of the words didn't work very well. There are parts of this, for instance, where the whole thing is supposed to be lit up, so they shouldn't be obscured ever, and yet the words won't show up. That kills me, I think, a couple of times later on in this video. I might think about restarting in those cases, but really, in this game, you come back so quickly after being killed that I didn't think it made much sense.
The mine had been built for industry.
So just like Creation City
But she had her
took
own
the metaphor of a city that's all about production and turned it into the
own
question
city.
of, like personal growth. This mine, which is also industrial,
only had
takes
the
a similar
courage to
point.
wield it.
It's about creating things.
Yeah, that's nasty.
Yeah, did you see that one? That one had nothing to do with the actual intentional mechanics here.
Yeah, I'm also seeing... You see those graphics glitches?
That did not happen while I was playing. Very sorry, everyone. This must be an artifact in the video encoding.
Oh, okay. I thought that was part of the game bugging out.
That was not intentional, and I hope it does not last very long.
That's alright.
Oh, dear. That's what happens when you're not a professional, Let's Player. Aaron Hansen.
I think it happens even if you are.
Really? I've never seen a Game Grumps episode like that. Then again, they can trash all their failures.
True enough.
Whereas I'm too lazy. I mean busy. Far too busy.
Why not both?
Anyway, so this is just a little, combat section in the middle. Most of these optional dungeons have one intermediate combat section and one at the end. I think there's very few for which there's more. And I've not seen one yet where there were fewer. But that's mostly to get you used to the idea of having to keep the stage lit up. We're going to have a more complicated version of that at the end.
Incidentally, I thought of a better way to put it than lazy or busy, which is underpaid. Or unpaid.
That is true.
The crystal crackled with imagination's light.
Yeah, you can't complain about the quality of something you get for free.
Which granted new freedoms.
I mean, you can, but...
You can't...
And people do all the time. Never mind, that's a stupid comment.
I mean, I do. But you can complain about... You can't...
I mean, I do.
You can't complain so much about things that the person is not getting paid for at all.
Yeah, right. Anyway, there's some more safes in here. Like this. Something just occurred to me? Why do we call them safes and not saves? A lot of other things that end with FE, we turn into a V in the plural.
Was it short for something?
Now that is an interesting idea. That safe was never really a noun, but more like an adjective that just lost its associated noun. Like a safety box or something like that?
Let's find out.
I'll race you. Nothing important's happening on screen after all. We're just going back through areas we've been through before. Nope, the first appearance in English, it was called save, actually. But it was not a plural, saves.
Oh, here's an interesting North American informal, a condom. I have never heard one called that.
It certainly makes Gandalf's line at the beginning of Lord of the Rings a lot stranger. I'm not going to tell you which one. You can figure that out yourself.
Okay.
Anyway. No, so you're already starting to see, I think, the development of the picture.
She felt the mind begin to come alive.
So the picture is her in her apartment surrounded by painting supplies. So just like how Creation City used the metaphor of creation for living your own life, this is more literally her trying to create something. Which I'm sure was very close to home for the people who worked in this game, since they are, in their own way, amateur artists. This game does have a very heavy sort of art theme to it. I mean, a lot of indie games are kind of artsy.
Not that we're implying the art here is amateurish.
Oh, no, not at all. It's very good art. But what I mean is, it comes out of this tradition of sort of do-it-yourself art.
Seams of rich minerals were
It is a very simple game. It doesn't use a complicated engine. I imagine, though, that the papercraft aesthetic took a lot of time.
Yeah.
She wasn't here for material.
And maybe a little bit of frustration, which is what they're getting at, symbolically, with all of the work that you have to do to go through here. It's like her trying to think of what to create. And for a writer, there's also a metaphor in that. It's looking for the right words. I can actually appreciate both of those, because not only do I write a lot, partly for my own living, but I also started oil painting recently. And it is not easy. You get covered in paint, just like she is in that image.
She wondered, who had worked these tracks?
Do you know much about oil paint, Greg?
Not a whole lot, no.
Can you guess how long it takes an oil painting to fully dry?
Who had dug out these walls?
Not off the top of my head. Couple days.
What great wonders.
Regular quality oil paint, it's about 2 weeks.
Wow.
So you can take an oil painting that's a week old, and if you touch it, you will come away with paint on your hands. I have gotten my hands very dirty just trying to transport my paintings from one room to another.
Oh, wow.
You become an absolute mess. And the thing about oil paint is, since it's based on linseed oil, it doesn't mix with water. Oil and water don't mix. It's a well-known phrase. So you cannot wash it off with water either. Your hands will stay grimy. This is one of those cases, by the way, where I think it might have been a mistake. Although, maybe this is meant to be dark until... Yeah, I guess that's what they're getting at. It's dark until you light it up with crystal. The problem with this is not very good conveyance, as Aaron Hansen would put it, because this room appears very bright. even before you turn on the crystal.
Yeah.
So it seems weird. You, instead of thinking that you haven't done something yet, you think, oh, the game's bugged. The fact that the game occasionally is bugged, it does not help matters.
I've seen that problem before where dark areas aren't dark enough. Was that Titanite?
That did say Titanite. So that makes me think even more that maybe the whole glowstone thing was meant to be a Magic the Gathering.
Flowstone?
Flowstone, yeah. Well, now I have to look that up too, because I'm incurably pedantic. I'm incurably pedantic, and also I mess words up. Flowstone is a real word.
Not terribly.
Flowstones are composed of sheet-like deposits of calcite. They're the most common speleothem, and that's appropriate for this because speleothem is another word we've seen all the frickin' time in this game already. A word that I did not know about until I played this game. So you see, you're learning something just by watching this. It's edutainment. Well, it's edu anyway. There's a question as to whether it's entertaining.
Ouch.
But I liked it. Anyway, so the oil painting. Do you know what the best way to get oil paint off your hands is? The recommended way?
Soap?
You wash your hands in olive oil. Then soap. Then you wash it off. It works pretty well. But it can be a little bit expensive.
Yeah.
Don't buy the extra virgin stuff. It doesn't clean any better. Actually, pro tip, it really doesn't cook that better either. It's kind of a pretension thing. Now, anyway, it's interesting though. You know, when you try to do a creative thing like oil painting, you start to realize, you know, just how impressive a lot of the accomplishments of people who do that kind of thing are. Especially mixing. You know, you'd think color mixing would be a fairly simple proposition, but apparently it's a lot easier with acrylic paints.
Why is that?
I don't know. I guess oil paint tends to stick together a little more, and like some paint tends to rise to the top. I was talking to my sister about it the other day, and I was like, one thing I didn't realize is black overpowers every other color that you put it with. Like, you can mix a little bit of black into blue, it'll just turn all the paint black instantly. By the way, this is one of the instances of glitching that I was talking about.
Yeah, no kidding.
It can't be anything but glitching, because they put you in a tiny, you know, corridor with this thing. There's no lights to light up. So no, it's just a glitch. But my sister said, well, yeah, that's just common sense about the color mixing. And I was like, that's common sense? I mean, I had to figure it out the hard way. Made me feel kind of stupid. But that did lead me to something, which is looking up Bob Ross.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone loves Bob Ross. And I learned a couple of interesting things about color mixing from watching The Joy of Painting. Like, for one thing, did you know that all the paintings he did, he started by applying a very thin coat of white paint?
Wet on wet,
canvas?
yeah.
Have to be ready soon.
Yeah, he never starts with a bare canvas.
No. That's actually a specific method of painting that his teacher claimed to have invented, although he didn't.
William Alexander. No, he didn't. Well, I was going to say, having the underlayer of white isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all of wet on wet. Like, technically what I've been painting is wet on wet. Wet on wet just means you don't let a layer dry before you paint on top of it. And yeah, it's very old. I mean, the first painters to use oil paint, which was like 15th century, they painted wet on wet for a few areas.
Yeah.
Jan van Eyck probably painted wet on wet. I will say one thing, though. I've watched William Alexander paint. His style and Bob Ross's are almost exactly the same. And William Alexander had a PBS show like 8 years before Bob Ross.
Yeah.
And Bob Ross admitted that he learned the technique from William Alexander. Maybe Alexander didn't, like... I think it might be a language thing. Like, he didn't mean to say he invented wet-on-wet painting. Maybe he meant to say he invented the particular style that was used by Bob Ross.
I don't know, but I think he did resent Ross's success.
Well, I could definitely think that. And, you know, the reason for that, it's not because Bob Ross was a better painter, because they're almost exactly the same. It's because Bob Ross was cool and William Alexander was kind of weird.
Yeah.
He had that accent, you know, and kind of an awkward manner. I mean, Patton Oswalt has a routine about him that I think is totally unfair, but it's funny. Where he just has him, like, go off on a rant. But no, I think there might be a language thing there. You know, like some kind of misunderstanding. Like when Al Gore said he invented the internet. He didn't actually say that. What he said was he took the initiative in developing the internet. Which is still not true, but it's different, you know. Anyway, let's forget about politics and talk about
Came
words.
from a bare rock.
So, earlier we had 4 crystals to worry about. Now we have 6.
Ooh.
It's getting a little complicated in here.
Is it just me, or are the... Did I see the lightning bolts jumping between the crystals, or was that just,
The lightning bolts are traveling between the enemies.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember Spark's power, but
No.
it leaps from enemy to enemy and destroys them.
I knew about
They weren't
that
going
part.
between the crystals. I mean, some of the enemies are right next to the crystals, so I can see why it would look that way.
Yeah, that's what it was.
It's also possible that when I type in the word for the crystal, that it treats it as if I'd hit an enemy, and so it leaps to an enemy. If it does that, it's even more broken than I thought it was, which is an accomplishment.
Yeah,
I mean, you can see how broken this is. Nothing is coming anywhere near me.
that was what I thought at first, so I don't think it's the case.
Yeah, it's just leaping all over the screen. That's why it looks like it's going between crystals. Yeah, this mechanic, I like it. It's interesting. You know, it's one of the few, really shaking things up things that they do with mechanics in this game. But at the same time, it is a little buggy.
Doubts.
You can see not only that it doesn't always appear right away when I get the light, but also that when the light fades out, sometimes you can still type in
Yeah.
words quickly.
Like she wore.
It doesn't fade as quick as it should or come in as quick as it should.
No.
They're not serious problems, but they make you a little annoyed. It's sort of the same thing when I talked earlier about how you can type in words and it'll get hung up on something and not let you keep going. Sometimes it just feels unfair. To be fair, though, I brought this on myself. I have it on adaptive difficulty, and I think I already proved before that it's gone way above insane at this point. So I could turn it off anytime I like. It's just this game is interesting when you have it on the adaptive difficulty setting, in a way that it is not at all if you keep it on moderate difficulty. I mean, again, I don't want to brag, but I guess it is that this game is meant to teach typing. So if you're already good at typing, it does seem very under-leveled in terms of challenge.
And this mine would survive the shadow.
You know, I often wonder in terms of difficulty in games, how difficult it is for people who've played games for, say, a decade, to appreciate that level balancing isn't always for them, a challenge. That maybe it's aimed at people who are new to video games, and it's simply not the same level of challenge for them. Something that seems way too easy for an old-timer.
Lit by
Maybe
internal
just right.
fires of 1,000 hues.
I guess.
Fueled and sated, her path stretched onward.
People keep talking about how, games get easier over time. And I think there's a little something to that. But I also think that people just get better without realizing it. Especially when you play the same types of games. And, I'm not entirely qualified to say this, but I do think there's been more and more a tendency to have a lot of games of the same genre in more recent years. So, if you play Battle Royale games, after you've played one for 100 hours, the next one that comes out is probably going to seem pretty easy to you.
I guess.
What do you think about, I think I've heard Yahtzee talk about this, the distinction between a player getting better and the player avatar just getting stronger? I know Aaron Hansen's talked about it. Like, most games have the kind of adaptive difficulty where your player avatar gets stronger. And that's one reason why games can paradoxically seem to be getting easier as you go along instead of harder.
I think Dark Souls would be a good example of both, which I realize is a fairly predictable answer.
Oh, definitely. But it's the reason why people think Dark Souls is a great combat system. That it not only does both, but it does them well. That it has... I guess what I'm saying is, what people like about Dark Souls is that there is something to learn. Some games, really, it's not a matter of learning. Like, you can master it in half an hour, and then it's just a question of how strong your character is.
True enough.
What I like about Dark Souls, and this is one thing I think is underrated in a lot of games, is enemy variety. And the reason for that is not so much like aesthetic or anything. It's that with different enemies, you have to learn how they work. And that's something that I think is kind of underrated in a lot of games. A lot of games throw you against the same kinds of enemies in different scenarios. They don't really take advantage of the unique challenge of having enemies that act differently and have different skills. Anyway, enough of random general stuff about games. Let's get back to this game. We're rapidly approaching the 4th area at this point. We aren't getting an intro for it because I stupidly already triggered the intro for it back in that video 2. But this is Chapter 4, the one about wind. Which is why, appropriately, we have all these warps blowing us around the map.
True enough.
And all these fractured islands. Which the idea, I guess, is that the tornado blew these islands apart. Which isn't really how tornadoes work, but, you know, I'll let it pass.
Still beats how L. Frank founded them.
What do you mean? I love L. Frank. What's so weird about the tornadoes in Oz?
Okay. I mean, tornadoes have actually done that, like, picked up somebody's entire house.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
deposited them relatively unharmed.
Mm-hmm. I like the one where it picked up a carton of eggs, and when it laid them down, they weren't broken.
Oh, yeah, it does... They do weird shit like that.
Well, when you think about it, most of the damage in a tornado does not come from the action of the winds themselves. It's from things being smashed into each other. So the winds, you know, they pick up continuously, if not slowly, and then they let down continuously.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it might be entirely possible. I would say, though, that the big thing about how it didn't break any of the eggs ignores all the times when a tornado picked up a carton of eggs and did break them all.
Or
part of that's just confirmation bias.
You know, a house.
Yeah, right. No, I love The Wizard of Oz, and not just the stuff the MGM movie is based on. I really like the original book. It's clever, you know, it's got a lot of details that you don't see in children's fiction anymore. Like people who can literally break, and then they're just dead, and it's creepy.
Yeah.
They tried to do that in Oz the Great and Powerful. I don't know if they did a good job of it, because I couldn't stand more than 5 minutes of that movie.
I know the wind swept gently through her hair.
Alright, not amazing.
The China People. How was that section of it? You remember, right?
Yeah. I didn't hate that movie that much at the time. I know other people just could not stand it, though.
Well, as you probably know from my attitude toward BioShock Infinite,
If the land
I'm very, like, hypersensitive, almost allergic to anachronisms. And the way that Oz talked, I was just like, this is James Franco. This is clearly a guy who grew up in the 90s. He doesn't sound a goddamn thing like someone who grew up around the turn of the century. He uses the word, like, heart attack, like you're giving me a heart attack. It's like, people did not talk like that. Anyway, no, that's just my personal, you know, prejudices about storytelling.
Well...
In retrospect, I'm actually kind of, admiring of Sam Raimi that he decided to go for that. It's brave. A lot of people wouldn't choose to make a movie like that. It didn't work out very well. But I mean, who else would make an Oz movie these days, you know?
I guess.
I admire his attempt, at least.
Faint
also, if he casts anyone other than James Franco. Huh?
I think, you're damning it by faint praise there.
Well, obviously.
By the tornado's furious passage.
You know, Sam Raimi is kind of the first director, I think, who initiated this trend of taking people who did, like, crappy, low-budget horror movies and having them direct big blockbusters.
I guess, yeah.
Because that's everywhere these days, but Sam Raimi did it back in 2002 with Spider-Man. And back then, I think it was just because they were desperate. They were like, let's get anyone to do a comic book movie. They've been so bad for the past decade. Except Batman.
Yeah.
And these days, it's such big business that, honestly, I think the only reason other people do it is because Disney did it. And I think Disney did it because they like no-name directors because they can control them. Or just fire them.
Let's not go there. Holy shit.
Okay, anyway. So we're seeing a slightly new mechanic here. These floating rhombus diamonds. Just diamonds, I guess I should say. When you type in their 2-letter word, they turn into platforms. None of them are useful yet, but we'll see pretty soon we'll have to start using them. Yeah, here's one. This is going to become a bigger deal when we start getting chased. I don't know if you remember from the last video, but there's always a chase in every single one of the major levels.
I guess
you get trapped in a room with enemies you can't attack. They chase you. Eventually you get the power, and then you can, attack them back.
I guess that is true, now that I think about it.
The chase thing?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. No, it's one of the few strict design principles I think this game has. Anyway, I don't know if you remember these mazes from Creation City. Here it's getting a little more complicated because we have to manipulate 2 sets of doors at the same time.
Yeah, I was wondering about that until I saw you used the second one.
Yeah, I got stuck in the room with one of them, and I didn't realize for a second there was another one off in the corner. What's interesting about this is that you would think the challenge is just getting the right combination of the two, but it's also making sure that at the point you need to see both of them, that you can. Because if you can't see it, you can't use it. It's one of the rules in this game, even if you remember the word. And so when I was in the corner there, I had to make sure that the other one was already triggered, because I wasn't going to be able to use it.
Oh.
It's not a really complicated kind of puzzle, but it's interesting. It's another thing you have to remember. Another wrinkle.
And
This section is kind of devious. It includes lots of little things you can get for points to trick you into hanging around too long while these wind enemies chase you down.
are those Hatakana?
I think they are just made-up characters. The ones earlier looked like a runic script. I don't know if you remember. I guess maybe they're going for a bit of a thematic thing here. So the ones earlier were runic because it was like a North, Scandinavian kind of style. And this is slightly more Asian, this environment. It's about balance and harmony. Very Eastern stuff. Floating cities are interesting. I've always liked the concept, especially since I think it's underused. Like in Zelda, there have only been a couple of games that have had places floating in the sky, but I've liked every single one of them, especially the floating city from Twilight Princess.
What about...
It's very evocative,
What about the
What about-
entire town in Skyward Sword?
I was more ambivalent about that one because being in the sky didn't seem to make much of a difference to them.
Yeah, no.
I mean, yeah, they flew birds around, but you could do that with almost any city. It didn't need to be in the sky, you know what I mean? The city in the sky, it felt more alien and unusual. In Skyloft, it's like you grew up there, right? So it's just a normal town. And it looks like a normal town, and they act like one. So it didn't feel very mystical, if you know what I mean.
True enough.
So now we finally got Wind, which is the last power. I think it might actually be called Gust by the game. Or maybe it's just called Wind. This power blows out a gust of wind that, among other things, blows enemies backwards. It is, I would say, sort of like the upgraded version of Ice, in the same way that Spark is like the upgraded version of Fire. And it is very powerful. The one unfortunate thing is that, unlike Spark, which just speeds things up, Wind delays things. It makes it so that enemies will be blown away, and they're often blown so far off screen that you cannot attack them afterwards. So you have to wait for them to come back in the screen. That's why Wind is, oddly enough, my least favorite power.
It also seems
It's
to
the most...
have a
Sorry, go ahead.
blow-through effect.
It does. It blows all the enemies that are in the area of the enemy that you hit. It's a very powerful defensive weapon in this game. The only trouble with that for me is that I do type very fast, and so I don't really need a lot of defensive options.
The winds
Yeah.
I prefer Spark because it speeds everything up.
Or Cold, which holds them in place.
Yeah, with Cold, you can just keep wailing on them. But Wind, I mean, you can see right here. I'm just bumbling around, waiting for them to get back in. And enemies in this game in general do move very slowly. There are a few that don't, and for them, Wind works really well. But for the most part, enemies in this game, I would not suggest using Wind, unless you need a lot of breathing room. It's a good, temporary thing to use for just a few words to give yourself some space. In the hardest challenges in this game, especially on adaptive difficulty, I would say by all means use Wind.
Yeah.
In those, anything that gives you some extra time is good.
I was gonna say, if you're being swamped, it could be very useful.
It is, just like Ice.
Something at least.
Whereas Fire is not useful in those situations. Spark arguably is, because since Spark gets rid of a lot of enemies at once, it can sort of thin out the ranks around you.
Fire actually seems like it would be best against really tough enemies with long words.
That is what it's best for, yes.
And I think I might have already said that. But...
The only trouble with that is that Spark is even better for them.
Yeah.
Since Spark will take care of the enemies around them. The thing about Spark is, the best way to use it is you don't even type in the words in the big enemies at all. Big enemies are often flanked by smaller ones. So if you use Spark, you can type in the small words and take down the big enemies without doing anything to them. That is one thing that I think might be better balanced in this game, to make it more challenging, is that Spark would only work going from a bigger enemy to a smaller one. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I don't think that's the kind of challenge they wanted. They wanted this game to be more accessible than that, and I can appreciate that. It might be interesting as an option, though. Mm-hmm. So one thing you might have noticed about the wind power is that it's just a gust that goes in a straight line, so you don't actually need to type in all of the words. If you're going in a straight line, you can just type in one of them. But it will aim for the one that you're going for, so often it is best to aim for the one in the middle if you're trying to hit a straight line like this. That will often assure that you get the right one. So here's the intermediate combat section.
Up from nowhere.
Fairly simple here. Enemies come from all directions. I guess just to demonstrate the value of thinking on your feet. I don't know what I was thinking about that guy. The bug that had C over his head. I think I might not have seen it. You know, those bugs are very small.
True enough.
And sometimes they blend in. You know, with all of this really bright colors, sometimes white fades into it.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
And of course, all around the periphery, it's white. Anyway, I shouldn't make excuses for myself. I just made a mistake. Some of the hardest sections in this game, in fact, are ones where they send a lot of the one-letter enemies after you. When they mix them in with the longer word enemies, it's often hard to prioritize. Mm-hmm. Though really, you need to hit the single-letter ones quickly, because they are the fastest in the game.
Can you use, like, electricity on them?
You can. It doesn't make a big difference for them, though, because you can type so fast otherwise. Mm-hmm. Like, Spark doesn't move as fast as your own fingers can if you do it. I have to say, I've talked about this game being buggy. One area where I really appreciate it is that it does move very fast. It keeps up with your typing, even if you're typing at 80, 90 words a minute. Mm-hmm. You know, considering there has to be an animation for each thing you type, I am impressed by how well this game keeps up.
True.
I'm not sure if it has a high frame rate, or if it just, like, sorts things well. It doesn't seem like it has a high frame rate. Like, I don't know if this is 60 FPS. Mm-hmm. It's hard to tell, you know, like, some games that's really important in combat. With a typing game, it's a little difficult to tell whether combat is really taxing on the hardware.
True enough.
Because it's typing, you know, you're not clicking.
Yeah.
I don't know. Either way, I guess what I'm saying is this game does a very admirable job of keeping up.
That it does.
And I appreciate that.
Yeah, this is an area where I think the wind power is a little better for you.
Yeah, definitely. No, the thing about this game is there's very few set-piece combat sections. It's mostly open exploration with combat. Mm-hmm. But the set-piece combat sections are designed specifically to interact well with the powers.
Yeah.
You know, the only reason they don't always work is that sometimes the game can't keep up with you if you're first typing. Which isn't really wrong, you know?
True enough.
It's funny, you know, I've thought a lot about this game, otherwise we wouldn't be watching it. But it's kind of hard to talk about because there's nothing to compare it to. I've never seen a game that tried the same kind of thing as this.
Except Typing of the Dead, I guess.
I guess that is a little similar, but it's kind of a 3D-ish style, isn't it? I feel like Typing of the Dead has fewer enemies coming at you, because in 3D it would be so much harder to tell. Although, now that I think about it, it's kind of a rail shooter-like setup, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is a rail shooter.
Even though it's 3D, it may not actually have sort of a 3D setup, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, you don't look around.
Here's some...
I don't know, I find it hard to tell games like that. Like if they're hard or not.
Complete non sequitur. Have you ever heard of WatchMojo.com?
I've heard of it.
They have a top 10 Fallout vaults.
How many Fallout vaults have there been?
more than 10, I guess?
I certainly hope so.
There's actually...
Vault 101. Vault 101 again.
Let's see. There were only, like, I think 2 in Fallout 1 and the same 2 in Fallout 2.
Really? I would have thought there would have been more in the original 2 games. Because of the way they're set
Or
up.
2 or 3. Well, there are a number mentioned. You hack into a computer at one point with, like, a database of different vaults. But
By the way, this is a mildly clever puzzle.
in terms
where
of...
you have to realize that you need to go around to that island in order to get a good beat on it.
In terms of vaults you
The
see, there's
landscape
2 in
surrendered
Fallout
to
1
the
and 2 or 3 in Fallout
scattered
2.
like pieces of her.
But there's actually a fair number in Fallout 3, 4, in each of 3, 4, and New Vegas.
I was hoping you were going to say 3, 4, and 5. Then I could have been like, Fallout 5. Do you know something I don't?
Wow.
Oh, by the way, here's a fun puzzle that had me completely hung up for about 20 minutes while I first played this game. I assumed this was an optional puzzle. You know, something that would lead to that treasure chest that's in the background. It actually doesn't, and you get to the chest just by going through a section that you might not expect to go through. This is completely mandatory. So I had finished it at a time when I thought I had to keep going. What happens is that when you spin these, the door underneath that's related to them opens up.
Oh.
I don't know if you've noticed, but one of them's already open. Another one opened and closed again because I accidentally stopped the one that was rotating. What makes this one tricky is it's not a typical thing of just having to blow through these things. You actually have to make sure that they are spinning properly, which I think means both you have to hit them from the right angle, and that if they're already spinning and you hit them wrong, they'll stop. There is a puzzle in Super Mario Sunshine that kind of reminds me of this. It's much worse in Sunshine, though, since you can't solve it halfway like you can with this. All you really need to do with this is you need to light up all those purple things. So you can open up half of these, go in and do them, and then open the other half while closing off the original 2, and beat it that way. You don't need access to all 4 of them simultaneously.
Jeez.
But you can see I'm struggling with this.
Yeah.
I'm just glad that I realized in between these 2 that you don't need to have them all spinning at once to solve some kind of bonus puzzle. Because, like I said, that really kept me hung up early on. I haven't yet seemed to get the clue that you can just do this part way and then finish it later, but now I'm getting it. By the way, that area I just passed,
Yeah?
this is how you get to that treasure chest. And I thought it took a whole puzzle to get it. It doesn't. You just have to go through a section that looks like it's not passable. There was another treasure like that earlier. I don't know if you noticed the picture on the fragments this time, but it shows our protagonist looking into a mirror. She's wearing a dress, but her mirror image is wearing like a leather jacket.
Oh. Interesting.
I think it's about her decision to join a punk band, but I could be wrong. No, I'm being dumb. Actually, it's about her going on a date, I think. Her personal life.
That makes
It's the
more
one
sense.
section of her life we haven't touched on yet. The story in this game is not really special. It's nothing particularly complicated or engaging. But I think it does a fairly good job of interesting you.
Yeah, it does.
And, this girl's problems are fairly typical problems, but that doesn't make them less sympathetic.
No. Mundane problems can be quite, compelling if you present them right.
Finally got them all spinning, thank goodness. I actually like stories that focus on the sort of metaphorical interpretation of people's real-life problems. We were talking about Alice Madness Returns earlier.
Yeah.
I've always liked the game for that. And the original Alice does a good job of that, too. The only reason I don't like the original Alice is because it's based on Quake in terms of challenge, and it's way too hard.
Yeah.
She found the center of the islands. The eye.
But we were talking about Oz earlier. One of the things I like in the Oz series is the movie Return to Oz. Have you ever seen it?
No.
It was made in the 80s, and it is one of the darkest movies Disney has ever been responsible for. A lot of the stuff in the movie is from the original story. It's just the way it's rendered, which is much darker and creepier than the original MGM Wizard of Oz, which, you know, is really goofy and has...
Yeah.
It's sillier and more childish than the original book it was based on, even. Whereas Return to Oz, if anything, is darker than the original book. So a lot of people have negative memories of it, and they're like, oh my god, that's the movie that ruined my childhood. I tried to play it for my grandma once, because she loved Oz when she was growing up. She couldn't watch 5 minutes of that movie. She said it was just too frightening. But Return to Oz, one of the things I like about it is it focuses on this sort of mental world being tied into her fantasy. Sorry, her fantasy world being tied into her real-life problems. So the premise of Return to Oz is that Dorothy has come back from Oz, as it were, and her family thinks that it's all like a game in her head. Mm-hmm. She's sort of a little off, and maybe it was just, you know, trouble with the farm and the fact that someone tried to kill her dog. You know, that can have a negative effect on a young girl. So they send her to this quack who wants to cure her with electroshock therapy.
Oh, jeez.
Because it's the wave of the future. This is set around the turn of the century. And from there, she sort of goes back to Oz, which, realistically, it's like her sinking into her fantasy world.
Yeah.
And she has to face challenges that sort of resemble her ambivalent attitude toward Oz. So, like, when she gets to the Emerald City, it's been torn apart, and all the people have been turned to stone. You can see why a lot of kids did not like this movie.
Yeah. Oh, shit.
But as an adult watching it, I have to say, it's kind of cool. It did a good job of presenting a darker take on Oz.
It is interesting that the, like, gritty reinterpretation...
Unnamed corpse.
This is doing, like, the gritty reinterpretation.
Yeah, I know. It's like the grim dark version. It's surprising they didn't make it in the 90s.
Long before those were a thing. Yeah.
The girl who played Dorothy in that, Firuza Balk is her name. She actually like won a contest where there were like 3,000 girls who tried out to be Dorothy, and she was the one who was picked.
Oh wow!
Which is surprising because she's not great. I mean, she's good. She's better than most child actors, but not great. I didn't realize this until a little while ago, but she's actually the daughter of this guy who was in a psychedelic band from the 60s that I kind of like, called Kaleidoscope.
Huh.
She calmed.
Yeah, it's weird when you see the connections people have in the entertainment industry.
Yeah, no kidding.
She didn't do much after Return to Oz. She had the typical child actor curse. Anyway, having gone on another tangent, this is just the episode of tangents, we managed to conquer this challenge. I was a little surprised by this. I thought I'd gone into the warp that takes you back outside the level.
Uh-huh.
Actually, I went into the warp that took me here, which I'm surprised it was still active, but go figure. Anyway, I got confused, but now I'm out of it. So, that has been the wind level. We only have one more dungeon in the game. I shouldn't have said earlier that this is the last mandatory dungeon, because the 8th dungeon is actually the last one, the 5th mandatory dungeon. And we'll be getting to that next time, when we will finish this game. Promise.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Fun times.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.